Welcome. Today is Monday, September 15th. No news Monday, but let's go to news anyways just to see what we have coming up this week. Retail sales tomorrow, FOMC press conference and federal funds rate on Wednesday, which is a heavily anticipated meeting. We could see rates being cut on that day, or we could see the Fed releasing information about when he may cut rates on that day. So on a later date. Trump again pushing more pressure on Powell. Must cut interest rates now and bigger than he had in mind. Housing will soar. Now, with that being said, let's go to the charts. See what happened today. So, from over the weekend into today, on Friday we had pushed all-time highs and then price had fallen. And then we had consolidation, or I guess we had uptrend, and then price fell back down as we moved sideways from the weekend into today. And into today, from pre-market into New York session, we saw price continue to rise, targeting that all-time high, and then price just kept moving through it ever so slightly. Not really in a big explosion, but just a moderate movement up. And then we have our 15-minute opening range at 9:30. Market opens 9:30. Price exits opening range, and we had been at like 0.4%. As you can see right now, it's relative to where opening range high was. So price leaves the opening range and then comes back down and then exits price again. So this was the first move, and then this was the retracement back in. So we broke structure to the upside because overall we've just been moving up, making all-time highs. Price continued higher and then came back into 15-minute orb where we see exits again, increasing volume to the upside, which a position like this, entering even right here and targeting the halfway point of the opening range, would not be a poor position. I could understand behind it because we've been moving up, making all-time highs. But with the upcoming news of rates getting cut, it would make sense to see irregular price action. And there is no real regular price action, but at the same time, you can argue that although each time is very different and separate from the others, they tend to happen over and over. So right now, though, we're just not seeing much. And like we said, with FOMC and that information coming up on Wednesday, it's likely to see irregular price action. But to enter on a long off of that second and targeting right here wouldn't be a poor position. So now let me give you some information as to why I'm not trading. For one, I have been trading for the last about 6 months. I have not seen a September, and historically, September is a bearish month where more times than not in the history of the S&P 500, price has matched up to prices fell 1% on average, according to more times than not in the past. With that being said, that in confluence with rates getting cut, the expectation this week of rates getting cut on Wednesday, or the information being released about later, when rates get cut, it is not very expected. It is likely expected to see price a surge. So if you don't know, well, actually, let's just go to the fear and greed index. So with the fear and greed index measures the sentiment of right now in the market. And what the sentiment is the emotion, as you can see here. What emotion is driving the market right now? When we see fear, that usually reflects bearish trend, downtrend. When we see greed, that usually reflects the market is open to buying because there's more money to be spent. So while there is extreme greed, we're pushing all-time highs with the anticipation of rates getting cut. It's not an optimal time to be in the market. It's more an optimal time to wait. That's how I see this. That's how I see it right now. So this month, instead of me spending the subscription on the trading plan, I'm putting that money into the market elsewhere in a more long-term investment. So I've been investing in over the weekend. I started buying some Bitcoin, and I replaced my XRP shares with Bitcoin shares as I started to understand. So why I bought into Bitcoin is because I see as the US dollar is decreasing because the Fed is printing money. The US dollar, let's just basically start it from scratch. The US dollar, say Congress needs to spend more money. They need to pay the mailman, they need to pay other expenses, and they need to go to the Fed for, say, $1 billion. And $1 billion is crazy, but to go to the Fed and say, hey, we need some money for spending. But first, before they even do that, they go to the Treasury and they say, hey, I need this money for spending, as the Treasury will hold that money. Then the Treasury says, hey, we already gave you this much. But they're like, it doesn't matter. We need the money. So in Treasury and Congress, they'll go to the Fed, and then the Fed is printing money as we speak. So they say, hey, we need $1 billion, and we need it out to the Treasury. Then they being the Fed says, okay, great. Let me write this check. They write the check, and then they give it to them. Now they wrote the check, but where's the money being spent from? What account is this being spent from? And just that, there is no account. This money is being handed back out. So the problem with this is that if there's always supply and there's increasing demand, the price will diminish over time, because you're making it's hard to explain as being into this very new, but I'm doing my best. So if somebody's always printing money and it's always being spent and nobody's accounting for it, yet we're in debt, the US dollar will see a decline in its price value. So with Bitcoin, it is seen as an alternative, a hedge against the US dollar, a hedge against inflation. Is it against? Yeah, I think it's against inflation, or it's being thought of being used to um, to actually pay back the debt. So why Bitcoin? Is because Bitcoin is the anchor within crypto. It is the leading enforcer, the one that is paving the way within crypto. XRP, Ethereum. Now I'm not too familiar with Ethereum, but I know that Bitcoin is the leading blockchain for crypto. No, so the leading crypto for blockchain technology. So, anyways, with all this being said, there is a finite amount of Bitcoin. And if people are putting their money into Bitcoin as Bitcoin is rising, and if there's a finite amount, there is a finite amount and demand is increasing, which drives up the price value. And if more institutions are adopting Bitcoin, then this means that price will keep increasing. And when it gets to a point where all the Bitcoin have been bought up, then trading fees and people sending Bitcoin from one place to another, I think that'll be the way of how price will even increase at that point and how it will be used as trade and transaction. But putting my money into Bitcoin, when valuations and estimations for price in the future are a lot higher, and there's institutions that are literally representing this company with their whole financials. Even Donald Trump is one of the top investors into Bitcoin, or Donald DJT, cameras and technology, something like that. But it's looking like that is where that will be something that is used to medicate this corruption, which is unlikely. As or actually not. I don't. I couldn't tell you. I don't know. But with all this being said, I'm not trading the S&P 500 this month because I want to sit on my hands. And as I'm sitting on my hands, I'm putting that money into an investment account, saving more into that account, because the first 100K is a bitch. I think that Bernie, not Bernie, but fucking um Berkshire, Berkshire and Hathaway. I forget who said it. Charlie something. He said that the first 100,000 is a bitch. So yes, I feel like that was a solid view for today. Um, so NQ is still pushing higher. SMT, it was the same SMT as earlier as, and what I mean by SMT, we saw ES make a low. Well, so ES made a high and then made a low. NQ made a high and then a low. ES makes a high and then a low. NQ makes a high and then a higher low. But as I say this, there have been times where we see price never recovers from here. But there's also been times, more often than not, where ES is the lagging index and NQ is pushing higher while ES soon to push higher. But volume is decreasing. And I had seen this TikTok. I saw this TikTok or this reel from this one guy. He's a trader. And he said, I feel bad for all of the traders, the new traders coming into September, because the price action has just been brutal. And I was thinking about it and I was like, yeah, no, that's funny, because coincidentally I'm trying to not trade this month. I had traded up until about, I think it's the 8th. I traded on Friday, but that was so why I traded on Friday was because I removed my subscription on the account. But when you remove a subscription, you have an additional few days until that subscription is wiped. Friday was my final day to even have that subscription. And I had it was a sim, it was it was not qualified yet. So it was a sim account waiting to be qualified. And I just put in max risk, saw what happened. And I guess that day was more gambling, which on days like that where it is more gambling and very few days will I make a decision like that. They're wiped from my trading plan. It's not really useful for my trading plan outside of the psychology part. So as long as my psychology is intact, a day like that is a day of just pissing in the wind. Because it was either I lose the subscription on the 15th, or I hit max loss, or I pass the account. So, yes, sir. Just to, all right. Now to enter in the perfect trader. What was interesting is today Tesla Elon Musk buys $1 billion worth of Tesla. And the last time he bought $1 billion, or last time he even purchased Tesla, was back in 2020. And back in 2020, Tesla at that time had not been in the S&P 500. So he got in, and I think that Tesla was trading at like $68. And then you see just a generational run in price when the S&P 500 then, or the Tesla then gets accepted into the S&P 500, and then you see just this generational run in price. So Elon Musk buys $1 billion worth of Tesla. We see a 6% increase in price. That is fucking wild. And then and today, I mean, these days is literally history in the making. These days happen very rarely. No News Monday. Price bias exited orb and then retraced back in and exited again with an increase in volume to the upside and then moves sideways. So, orb 5-minute retest. So, what do we see coming up this week? We have tomorrow retail sales, Wednesday FOMC, Thursday unemployment claims, and Friday nothing. Damn, so that trade on Friday, I had placed a trade on Friday, and that was the trade that I had placed with the thought of this could go to zero, whatever. And let's go in the 15-minute. I'll mark out the 9:30 candle. I didn't even look at this after. I didn't see it after. After price developed. Nah, there was no opportunity. I think I had bullish bias for continuation to the upside, but then price just fell. So it was basically the opposite of today. I had hopes of this action on today. I mean, I had hopes of this action on Friday, but it resulted in this. So, in order for a position to continue higher, there must be sentiment. That's how I see it. There must be sentiment which keeps it to go higher, which allows it to continue higher. Whereas on a Friday, with volume has decreased, when volume peaked at 8:30 in the morning and then volume decreased, we had this 9:30 lower than this news candle, and then you can just see here. I think I had entered on the candle closure out, which was yeah. So learning each day 1%. But actually, I need to take a picture of that. Today's not the 13th. I'm going to go to the beach. I'm going to go take a walk to the beach. That's what I plan on doing. All right, I'm going to catch y'all boys later. Trade recap. I got a journal. And then, yeah, don't work today. We got jujitsu. So I'll see if I'm going to that. I'm going to catch you guys later.